The scent of antiseptic and quiet desperation clung to the third-floor cardiac wing of St. Jude's General Hospital. It was a smell Amelia Vance had come to associate with survival, both her patients and her own. At 24, with eyes the color of a weary sky and a debt that felt like a physical weight on her shoulders, she was the newest nurse on the floor. She moved with a practiced quietness, a ghost in white scrubs, hoping to be efficient enough to be praised but invisible enough to be ignored. Her invisibility cloak, however, was useless against charge nurse Brenda Hoskins. Brenda was a woman carved from granite and vinegar, with a sharp, bird-like face and eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. She had been at St. Jude's for 2 decades, a reign of terror marked by her clipped commands and the withering sighs she deployed like surgical strikes. She saw Amelia's youth and gentle nature not as assets, but as weaknesses to be exploited. "Vance," Brenda's voice cut through the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. "Bed 7's IV drip is running 3 minutes behind schedule. Do you think Mr. Henderson's heart runs on your leisurely timeline?" Amelia's head snapped up from the chart she was annotating. "I just checked it 10 minutes ago, Brenda. It was perfectly on time." Brenda glided over, her orthopedic shoes making no sound. She tapped the digital display on the IV pump with a long, bony finger. "The machine says otherwise, and here at St. Jude's, the machines don't lie. People do." She gave Amelia a look that could curdle milk, then swept away, her very presence leaving a chill in the air. Amelia knew, with a sinking certainty, that Brenda had likely paused the drip herself for a few moments just to create the infraction. It was her favorite game, setting invisible traps and feigning disappointment when they were sprung. Amelia's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the drip rate. Quitting wasn't an option. Her mother's medical bills were a mountain, and this job, this grueling, soul-crushing job, was the only shovel she had. Her mother, suffering from a degenerative neurological condition, needed round-the-clock care that insurance only partially covered. So Amelia endured. She endured the double shifts, the condescending remarks, and the constant gnawing feeling of being one mistake away from ruin. In the corner room, 312, lay Eleanor Croft. She was a quiet, elegant woman with a weak heart, but a spirit that flickered with old-world grace. Her son was a constant visitor. He was a man who didn't fit the sterile environment of a hospital. His name was Julian Croft, and he moved with a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt threat. His suits were impeccably tailored, his gaze was unnervingly direct, and he spoke in low, measured tones that made everyone, even the doctors, seem to stammer. The nurses whispered about him. They said he was in import-export, a vague term that hung in the air with unspoken implications. Amelia wasn't interested in the gossip. She saw only a devoted son sitting by his mother's bedside for hours, reading to her in soft Italian or simply holding her hand. She treated Elena with the same gentle care she gave all her patients. She'd fluff her pillows, bring her an extra blanket without being asked, and talk to her about the weather, her garden, anything to bring a piece of the outside world into that sterile room. One afternoon, as Amelia was checking Eleanor's vitals, the older woman's hand weakly clasped her wrist. "You have kind eyes, dear," Eleanor whispered, her voice raspy, "like my mother had." Amelia smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that was becoming rare. "That's a lovely thing to say, Mrs. Croft. Thank you." From his chair in the corner, Julian Croft watched the exchange. He saw the way Amelia's shoulders, usually tensed with anxiety, relaxed for a moment. He saw the fatigue etched beneath her young eyes, but also the sincere warmth she offered his mother. He had seen Brenda Hoskins's treatment of the young nurse, too. He was a man who noticed patterns, and the pattern here was one of a predator and her prey. And if there was one thing Julian Croft understood, it was the dynamics of power. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered on Amelia long after she had left the room, his expression unreadable, calculating. The quiet war on the cardiac wing had just gained a new, silent observer. The weeks bled into a grueling routine of quiet suffering for Amelia. Brenda's campaign of psychological warfare escalated, becoming more audacious, more public. She would lose lab results Amelia had personally handed to her, only to find them later and berate Amelia for her disorganization in front of the entire nursing station. She assigned Amelia to the most difficult patients. The ones who were combative, the ones with infectious diseases requiring laborious gowning procedures, and the ones closest to death, ensuring Amelia's shifts were a marathon of physical and emotional exhaustion. One Tuesday, after a brutal 16-hour shift, Amelia was cornered by Brenda in the empty locker room. "Your charting is a mess, Vance," Brenda hissed, shoving a clipboard into Amelia's chest. "It's sentimental nonsense. Patient seemed more hopeful today. We are a medical institution, not a creative writing workshop. Stick to the facts. Or are you incapable of that?" "I was just noting a psychological improvement," Amelia murmured, her body aching, her spirit worn thin. "Dr. Evans says morale is important for cardiac recovery." "Dr. Evans isn't the one who has to answer to the board if your flowery prose gets us sued," Brenda snapped. Her face was inches from Amelia's. "You're a liability, a weak link. I don't know how you even passed your nursing exams." Amelia simply stared at her worn-out sneakers, blinking back the hot tears that threatened to fall. She couldn't give Brenda the satisfaction. She took a deep breath, the antiseptic air searing her lungs, and whispered, "I will be more careful." "See that you are," Brenda said, her voice dripping with contempt, before turning and leaving Amelia alone in the humming silence of the empty room. Amelia finally let the tears fall, silent drops of frustration and helplessness that traced paths down her tired face. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life, visible only when someone needed a target for their cruelty. Her only respite was room 312. Eleanor Croft's condition was stable but fragile, meaning she was a long-term resident of the wing. The bond between the elderly patient and the young nurse deepened. Amelia would save the softest bread rolls from her lunch for Eleanor, and Eleanor would tell her stories of her childhood in Sicily, of olive groves and the deep blue of the Mediterranean. They were small moments of grace in a world of beeping machines and sharp-tongued tyrants. Julian was there for almost every one of them. He sat in his customary chair, a silent sentinel. He never interrupted their conversations, but Amelia could feel his eyes on her. It wasn't a threatening gaze, but an intensely analytical one. He saw the dark circles under her eyes growing more pronounced. He saw the slight tremor in her hands when she came on shift, a tremor that vanished when she was tending to his mother. He saw the way she flinched whenever Brenda Hoskins's voice echoed down the hall. One evening, Julian was standing by the window in his mother's room, looking out at the rain-slicked city below. Amelia came in to change an IV bag. "She's a cruel woman," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't turn around. Amelia froze, her hands hovering over the IV stand. I don't know what you mean." He turned then, his dark eyes pinning her in place. "The charge nurse, Hoskins. She enjoys her power. She particularly enjoys using it on you." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. To admit it felt like a betrayal of some unspoken code, a confirmation of her own weakness. "She's just very particular. She has high standards." The excuse sounded feeble even to her own ears. Julian took a step closer. He was tall, and his presence seemed to shrink the already small room. "There is a difference between high standards and cruelty, Nurse Vance. One builds people up, the other tears them down for sport." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time she felt seen. Not as a bumbling subordinate or a charity case, but as a person. "My mother is fond of you," he continued, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. "She says you have a good soul. Good souls should not be treated like dirt." Amelia could only nod, a lump forming in her throat. She quickly finished her task and fled the room, his words echoing in her mind. It was terrifying to be noticed by a man like Julian Croft, but it was also the first time in months that she felt like she wasn't entirely alone in her struggle. The knowledge was a small, flickering candle in the oppressive darkness of Brenda's reign. But she had no idea that the silent observer was nearing the end of his observation. He was a man of action, and the time for action was rapidly approaching. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday. The air on the cardiac wing was thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm. A VIP patient, a city councilman named Robert Miller, had been admitted with acute heart failure, and the entire floor was on high alert. Brenda was a whirlwind of nervous energy, her cruelty sharpened to a razor's edge by the pressure. She stalked the hallways, her eyes scanning for any imperfection, any excuse to unleash her anxiety on a subordinate. Amelia, naturally, was her primary target. "Vance, did you personally check Councilman Miller's potassium levels?" Brenda demanded from the nursing station, her voice loud enough for everyone, including the Miller family huddled outside the room, to hear. "Yes, Brenda. They were stable an hour ago. The results are in his chart," Amelia replied, trying to keep her own voice steady. "I don't trust the chart. I trust my own eyes," Brenda snapped, storming past her. "Some of us understand what's at stake." Later that afternoon, the storm broke. Councilman Miller's heart monitor suddenly blared a frantic, high-pitched alarm. Code blue. His heart had gone into ventricular fibrillation, a chaotic, lethal rhythm. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses rushed in, a flurry of blue and white. Amelia was one of the first to respond, her training kicking in, pushing past the fear. "Get the crash cart," a doctor yelled. Amelia was already there, rolling the heavy cart towards the bed. As she maneuvered it around the foot of the bed, Brenda, coming from the other direction, shoved past a junior resident, intent on taking control. In her haste, she collided with Amelia. It wasn't a gentle bump. It was a hard, deliberate shove, born of panic and malice. "Get out of the way, you useless girl," Brenda shrieked. The shove sent Amelia stumbling backward. Her heel caught on the leg of a visitor's chair. For a moment she pinwheeled, her arms flailing for purchase in the air. Then she went down, hard. Her head cracked against the polished linoleum floor with a sickening thud that seemed to momentarily silence even the blaring alarms. A tray of sterile instruments she had been carrying clattered across the floor, scattering metal and plastic in a wide, shimmering arc. Pain, sharp and blinding, exploded behind her eyes. The world tilted, the frantic sounds of the code blue blurring into a dull, underwater roar. She lay there, stunned and humiliated, the cold of the floor seeping through her scrubs. From her vantage point, she could see the frantic legs of the medical team, the scattered, useless instruments, and the horrified faces of the councilman's family in the doorway. Brenda didn't even glance down. "Someone clean this mess up," she commanded, her entire focus on the patient. Her role in Amelia's fall completely ignored, dismissed as collateral damage. The other nurses, caught between the urgency of the code and the shock of what they'd just seen, hesitated for a second before the patient's needs forced them back into action. No one helped Amelia. They were too busy, or perhaps too afraid. Amelia pushed herself up onto her elbows, a wave of dizziness washing over her. The pain in her head was a throbbing drum, but the pain in her heart was worse. It was the absolute, soul-crushing humiliation of it all. To be knocked down, to be called useless, to be left on the floor like a piece of discarded trash while the world continued to spin around her. This was it. This was the bottom. But she was not unobserved. The door to room 312, directly across the hall, was slightly ajar. Julian Croft had been standing there, drawn out by the initial commotion. He had seen everything. He saw Brenda's panicked shove. He saw Amelia's fall. He saw the flicker of cruel satisfaction in the charge nurse's eyes before she turned away. He saw the other staff ignore the young woman on the floor. His face, usually a mask of calm composure, hardened into something cold and dangerous. The air around him seemed to drop several degrees. He watched as Amelia, with tears of pain and shame welling in her eyes, slowly, shakily, pulled herself to her feet. He watched as she gathered the scattered instruments with trembling hands, her professional instincts overriding her own injury. Julian Croft remained perfectly still in the doorway, a statue of quiet fury. He was a patient man, a man who believed in precise timing. The Code Blue team was saving a man's life. He would not interfere with that. But he looked at Brenda Hoskins, now barking orders and playing the hero, and made a silent promise. Her time was coming. The moment the immediate crisis was over, he would bring a crisis of his own to her doorstep. The war on the cardiac wing was over. A judgment was about to be rendered. The Code Blue ended as quickly as it began. The medical team, efficient and skilled, stabilized Councilman Miller. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the staff as the frantic beeping of the monitor settled into a steady, life-affirming rhythm. The doctors gave their final instructions and the team began to disperse. the adrenaline of the moment slowly ebbing away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Brenda Hoskins stood in the center of the room, preening. She was basking in the glow of a crisis averted, accepting the tired "good job" from the lead cardiologist with a smug nod. She had already rewritten the narrative in her head. She was the calm, decisive leader who had saved the day. The girl on the floor was a footnote, a clumsy interruption. As Brenda stepped out of the councilman's room, she began barking orders to the remaining staff. "I want vitals every 15 minutes, a full report on my desk in an hour, and someone needs to properly sterilize this equipment," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the instruments Amelia was still collecting with trembling hands. That's when she saw him. Julian Croft had stepped out of his mother's room and was standing in the middle of the hallway. He wasn't blocking the way, but his presence was as effective as a brick wall. The retreating doctors and nurses gave him a wide berth, a primal instinct warning them away from the epicenter of a storm they could feel but not yet see. His stillness was absolute, his dark eyes fixed solely on Brenda. The hallway, which had been buzzing with post-crisis chatter, fell eerily silent. Even the distant hum of the ice machine seemed to hold its breath. "Brenda," he said. The use of her first name, stripped of any honorific, was a deliberate violation. His voice was low and resonant, carrying with ease to every corner of the corridor. "A word, if you please." Brenda's smug expression tightened. "I am Charge Nurse Hoskins, and I'm very busy, Mr. Croft. If this is about your mother—" "This is not about my mother." Julian cut her off, his voice dropping another register, becoming something cold and sharp. "This is about your conduct, your character, or rather, your profound lack of both." He began to walk toward her, not with a panther's grace, but with the slow, inexorable certainty of a glacier. Brenda's bravado began to crack. She glanced around for support, but the other nurses suddenly found the floor tiles intensely fascinating. Amelia, frozen near the wall, felt the air crystallize with tension. "I have no idea what you are implying," Brenda retorted, her voice sharp with indignation, though a tremor of fear was now detectable beneath it. "Don't you?" Julian stopped a few feet from her. "Let me be more specific. I am implying that you are a bully, a sadist who gets her pleasure from tormenting those you perceive as weaker." He gestured with his chin toward Amelia. Case in point. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy, furious red. That was an accident, in a medical emergency. She was in the way. "An accident?" A new voice, calm and feminine, joined the conversation. Mrs. Miller, the councilman's wife, stepped forward from where she had been speaking with a junior doctor. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear and steady. "I was standing in the doorway, Nurse Hoskins. I saw you. You looked right at that young woman. You shoved her, deliberately, and you called her a useless girl." Brenda's jaw dropped. Being contradicted was one thing. Being contradicted by the wife of the VIP patient was a catastrophe. "You misunderstood. The chaos." "There is no misunderstanding malice," Mrs. Miller stated flatly, her gaze unwavering. Julian gave the councilman's wife a slight, almost imperceptible nod of gratitude before turning his full, chilling attention back to Brenda. "You see, Brenda, your problem is arrogance. You believe you operate in a vacuum. You believe your little cruelties are invisible." His eyes scanned the faces of the other nurses, who now looked up, drawn into the drama. "You think their silence is agreement, but it's fear. And fear has a shelf life." He took another step, closing the distance between them until he towered over her. "I've been watching you for 6 weeks. I saw you tamper with an IV drip to manufacture a mistake for Nurse Vance. I heard you in the locker room telling her she was a liability and a weak link. I have documented every extra shift, every high-risk patient, every public humiliation you have inflicted upon her." Each sentence was delivered with the cold precision of a scalpel, dissecting her career, her character, in front of the very people she ruled. Brenda began to tremble, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. He had seen everything. He had been keeping score. You can't prove any of that," she hissed, a desperate last-ditch defense. Julian smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "Can't I? A word from Councilman Miller about the unprofessional and violent conduct he witnessed today will trigger a full review. An anonymous tip to the nursing board, complete with a list of other nurses who are willing to finally speak up now that someone has promised to protect them from retaliation. It will be an avalanche, Brenda. Your career won't just end, it will be buried. The other nurses exchanged glances. A spark of courage, long dormant, began to flicker in their eyes. He wasn't just a powerful man, he was offering them an out, a shield. Brenda's world was collapsing in on her. The authority she had wielded for 2 decades was evaporating under the heat of his gaze. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question filled with genuine terror. "I'm a son who loves his mother," Julian said, his voice now a venomous whisper for her ears only. "And my mother is cared for by a young woman with a good soul. You tried to crush that soul for sport. You are a predator, Brenda, and predators only understand one thing, a bigger predator." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a rasp. "You treat people like animals. You snarl and snap to protect your little territory. So show me. Show me what you are." He straightened up, his public voice returning. "On your knees." A collective gasp swept the hallway. The command was so outrageous, so demeaning, it seemed to hang in the air, vibrating with menace. "No," Brenda choked out, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down her face. "This is a hospital. You can't—" "I can," Julian stated with absolute finality, "and I will. Your pension, your license, your reputation. They are all on the floor right here, right now. Or you can get on your knees and bark like the dog you are. One act of public humiliation to pay for months of private torture. It seems a fair trade to me." He glanced at Amelia. "What do you think, Nurse Vance? Is it a fair trade?" Amelia couldn't speak. She just stared, horrified and mesmerized. Brenda looked at Julian's unforgiving face. She looked at the circle of her former subordinates, their expressions now a mixture of pity and cold justice. She looked at Mrs. Miller, who watched with stern disapproval. There was no escape. Her reign was over. Her life was over. With a gut-wrenching sob that tore from the depths of her soul, Brenda Hoskins sank to the polished linoleum floor. Her body shook uncontrollably. She squeezed her eyes shut, a pathetic, broken figure in a crisp white uniform. "Woof," she whimpered, the sound swallowed by her own sobs. "I can't hear you," Julian said, his voice like stone. "Ah, woof," she cried, the sounds louder now, hysterical, echoing in the cavernous silence of the hallway. It was the sound of a complete and total capitulation, the sound of a spirit being irrevocably broken in public. Julian watched her for a moment longer, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. Then he turned his back on her, as if she no longer existed. He walked over to Amelia, who was pressed against the wall, shaking. His hand gently touched her elbow, but his eyes were scanning her face, noting the pallor, the faint sheen of sweat on her brow. The throbbing in her head intensified. "Come," he said softly, his voice a stark contrast to the glacial tone he'd used moments before. "You're done for today." He began to guide her away, but she stumbled, a wave of dizziness washing over her. His arm instantly wrapped around her waist, supporting her weight. "You hit your head," he stated, his brow furrowing with concern. "We're going to the ER." "No, I'm fine," Amelia protested weakly, embarrassed to be the center of yet more attention. "I just need to sit down." "It's not a request." He steered her toward the elevators, his movements firm and decisive. As they passed the nursing station, a timid, younger nurse named Sarah, whom Brenda often used for coffee runs, stepped forward. "Amelia," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide, "are you okay? We were all so scared of her. Thank you." It was a confession and an absolution all in one. Julian paused, looking from Sarah to the other nurses who were now emerging from the shadows, their expressions a mixture of awe and dawning liberation. He gave a curt nod. "Take care of each other," he commanded, before leading Amelia into the elevator, the doors closing on the scene of Brenda's utter ruin. In the sterile quiet of an examination room, a doctor confirmed Amelia had a mild concussion. Julian stood by the door, a silent, imposing guardian, his phone buzzing intermittently. He took one call, his voice a low murmur. "Yes, Mr. Davies, the situation on the 3rd floor is resolved. No, her resignation is non-negotiable. You'll find my full report, along with several signed affidavits, on your desk within the hour. Consider it a necessary restructuring." He hung up, his gaze returning to Amelia, who sat on the edge of the examination table, a paper gown draped over her scrubs. The hospital administrator had been dealt with in under 30 seconds. The drive to her apartment was a blur of streetlights and engine hum. The silence in the car was no longer just heavy, it was charged, vibrating with the aftershocks of the day. "You shouldn't have done that," Amelia finally whispered, staring at her own reflection in the window. "What you made her do, it was monstrous." "Was it?" Julian replied, his voice calm, his eyes fixed on the road. "She systematically tried to destroy your confidence, your career, possibly even your sanity. She endangered patients with her games. I simply gave her a taste of the humiliation she dished out daily. The only difference is, her humiliation was public and final. It was a mercy of a sort. A quick end is better than a slow decay." "A mercy," she repeated, incredulous. "You destroyed a woman's life." "I removed a cancer," he corrected, pulling the car to a smooth stop in front of her building. He killed the engine and turned to face her fully. The dim dashboard lights cast his face in sharp angles and deep shadows. "Think of it as an ecosystem, Amelia. Brenda was an invasive predator, poisoning the environment, killing off the weaker creatures for sport. All I did was introduce a larger predator to restore the balance. Now the ecosystem can heal. The other nurses will flourish. You will flourish." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a thick white envelope. He didn't place it on the seat, he held it out to her. "My mother and I have been discussing this. We believe in balancing the scales. This is for you." Amelia shrank back. "I can't take your money, Julian. This feels dirty. It feels like payment for what happened to her." "It is not payment. It is restitution," he said, his voice unyielding. "It is the salary you should have been earning without the emotional distress. It is the overtime you were forced to work. It is the cost of your mother's care, paid in full, so that no one can ever hold that debt over your head again. It is the freedom you were denied. You earned this, Amelia, not by enduring abuse, but by showing kindness when you had every reason to be cruel. Take it. Your fight is over." His words disarmed her. With a hand that trembled, she took the envelope. It was heavy, dense with paper, weighted with the price of her liberation and Brenda's absolute ruin. Tears she hadn't shed in the hospital now fell freely, tracing paths of exhaustion and overwhelming relief down her cheeks. 2 years passed. Amelia Vance, now assistant head nurse, moved through the cardiac wing with a quiet authority that was more absolute than Brenda's reign of terror had ever been. The fear was gone, replaced by a fierce protective loyalty centered on her. She hadn't hardened, she had sharpened. Julian had given her a shield, but she had learned to wield its shadow like a scalpel. Her life with Julian was a rare ecosystem of its own, a balance of his cold pragmatism and her deep empathy. He had revealed the true nature of his import-export empire, a labyrinth of logistics, information, and influence that touched every corner of the city. He called her his anchor, his conscience. She knew she was more. She was the strategist who saw the human cost he often overlooked, the one who refined his brutal tactics into something more elegant, more permanent. One raw autumn evening, leaving the hospital under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, she saw a figure huddled on a bus bench across the street. The silhouette was skeletal, a study in defeat against the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. A cold, metallic taste of familiarity pricked at Amelia's memory. Dismissing her waiting driver with a subtle gesture, she crossed the rain-slicked street, her umbrella a flimsy defense against the biting wind. The smell hit her first, stale liquor, damp wool, and the cloying sweetness of despair. The woman looked up, and the years collapsed. It was Brenda Hoskins. The granite had been scoured away by hardship, leaving a gaunt, brittle ruin. Her eyes, once sharp enough to flay skin, were now murky pools of desperation. The fire was gone, leaving only the damp, cold ash of a life consumed. "Vance," Brenda rasped, the name a shard of glass in her ruined throat. "Brenda." Amelia's voice was calm, a placid lake reflecting a storm. She felt no pity, no triumph, only the detached interest of a clinician observing a predictable outcome. "Look at you," Brenda sneered, her hands raw and chapped, clutching a threadbare coat. "Fancy coat, car waiting for you. All because you batted your eyes at that gangster. Come to gloat? To see what your monster did to me? He destroyed me. Amelia stood over her, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on her umbrella. He didn't destroy you, Brenda. Your own arrogance did. You saw one predator and never thought to look for another. Brenda's bloodshot eyes narrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? He's the one who made that scene, who turned everyone against me. That scene? Amelia gave a small, humorless smile. That was a spectacle, a diversion, a loud noise to draw everyone's attention. But the real weapon that ended you, it wasn't his voice, it was mine. Brenda stared, her mouth slightly agape. You? But you cried in the locker room. You were nothing. Tears can be a very effective camouflage, Amelia said, her voice dropping to a quiet conspiratorial tone. You thought I was weak because I was gentle. You never considered that I was just gathering data. A good nurse is, above all else, an observer. While you were playing your petty games, I was charting. Not just patient vitals, Brenda. I was charting you. A flicker of genuine fear, the first Amelia had seen, entered Brenda's eyes. I kept a small, spiral-bound notebook in my locker. Every time you humiliated someone, I would go there on my break, and I would write. Not with anger, with precision. 1432, BH publicly accused AV of incompetence, RE Miller potassium levels. Witnessed by Miller family, Nurse S. Chen. It was clinical. It was my real chart, the chart of your decay. The color drained from Brenda's face, leaving it a waxy, corpse-like gray. The story she had told herself for 2 years of being struck down by a powerful man was a lie. She had been dismantled by the useless girl she'd tried to break. Every lost lab result, I documented the time I handed it to you and the time you found it. Every time you paused an IV pump, I noted the discrepancy and the time you were last near the room. I cross-referenced your spiteful patient assignments with their acuity levels, building a file that proved a pattern of endangering staff and compromising care. I even taught Sarah and 2 others how to log your verbal abuses with timestamps in their personal notes. We were a quiet little cabal, Brenda. Your own private oversight committee. I built a fortress of data, brick by painstaking brick. A case so airtight, so meticulously detailed, the hospital board couldn't ignore it, even if they wanted to. Julian's performance in the hallway was just the thunder, Amelia said, her voice a clinical whisper. My report, submitted anonymously to the board and the hospital's legal counsel 10 minutes later, was the lightning strike that burned your career to the ground. He made them afraid of him. I made them afraid of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit they knew, with documented certainty, they couldn't possibly win. Which do you think is more powerful, Brenda? A mob boss or a nurse with a good lawyer and a perfect chart? Brenda began to tremble violently, a ragged sob catching in her throat. Why? She choked out. Why would you do all that? Because you were a disease, Amelia stated flatly, a malignancy in the heart of the ward. And I am a healer. I excised you. That is all. She reached into her purse, her movements deliberate. She pulled out a single crisp $100 bill and a business card. She tucked them into the pocket of Brenda's coat. That is for a hot meal and a bus ticket out of this city. The card is for a shelter 2 states over. They won't know your name there. It's the only chance you have left. If I ever see you near my hospital again, I won't need Julian to handle it. The evidence I still possess would be of great interest to the district attorney's office regarding criminal negligence. Do you understand me? Brenda could only nod, her body racked with the tremors of a complete and final defeat. She was not just ruined, she was irrelevant. Amelia turned and walked away, the rain washing the city clean around her. She didn't look back. When she stepped into the penthouse, the warmth of the fire a welcome embrace, Julian was waiting by the window, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He didn't ask about her encounter. He had seen the entire exchange through a sniper scope from the building opposite, a fact she was well aware of. His protection was silent, constant, and absolute. He handed her a glass. I saw her, he said, his voice a low rumble. She looks broken. She was always broken, Julian, Amelia replied, taking a sip of the deep red wine. She just made it everyone else's problem. I simply returned it to her. He watched her, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face, a look of profound respect. "I confess," he said, "my method was far more theatrical." "Your method was a sledgehammer, my love," Amelia replied, her eyes meeting his over the rim of her glass. "It's useful for breaking down a door, but it's messy. It leaves rubble and draws attention. I prefer a scalpel. It's quieter, more precise, and it leaves no doubt as to who the surgeon is." He took a step closer, his free hand gently touching her cheek. "I thought I was recruiting a soldier that day. I found I had allied myself with a general." "You are the thunder," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "But thunder is just noise. It warns of the storm's arrival. I am the silent, inexorable change in pressure that precedes it. By the time you hear me, it's already too late." He raised his glass, the crystal ringing softly against hers. "To the surgeon," he said, his voice filled with an awe he reserved for her alone. The city glittered below them, a sprawling kingdom of light and shadow. He had once thought it was his to command. Now he knew better. He had found his queen, and he finally understood that the most dangerous power isn't the one that roars for all to hear, but the one that whispers in the silence, holding the proof.